Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is about project integration. Now, the way the book is set up is that from this point on, they're going to have one chapter for each one of the 10 knowledge areas. The first one is the integration one. Okay, so let's look at the learning objectives, page 137. So, describe the overall framework for project integration. Discuss the strategic planning process and how it applies. Explain the importance of creating a project charter. Describe project management plan. Explain the project execution. Describe the process of monitoring and controlling. Understanding the integration, the change control process. Explain the importance of developing good procedures for closing out projects. And describe how software can assist in all these things. Okay, so right off the bat, you know how this thing works. You're going to have to pause the video and go read the opening case. So do that now. Just take your minute, read the case, and then when you're done, just come on back. Okay, so I assume you've actually read the thing. I hope. Anyway, this case is a kind of a weird one where this project had several managers, and what happened is they took the lead developer and waved a magic wand over his head and said, "You're now the program manager for this thing, or project manager for this thing." And he may have been an excellent programmer, but he's probably not a very good manager because he didn't really communicate well. And integration, this whole chapter is on integration, is all about communicating, coordinating to make sure that your project is in sync with everybody else's projects and status is unknown and all those kinds of things. So what he did is he gravitated to his familiar roles of being a programmer. He was doing, troubleshooting and software integration and things of that nature. Okay. All right. So on page 138, they talk about what is project integration management. Dun, dun, dun. And basically what it really means is the big picture. Okay, you're supposed to be coordinating coordinating your project or your phase. You may just be one phase of this thing with all the rest of the phases and with the corporate policies and everything. You're the person who not only sees the trees but also sees the forest. You're not working on one specific task to the exclusion of being able to see how it affects everyone else. That's the whole point of integration. Okay, so basically it's the big picture. Okay, not down in the weeds, but in the big picture point of view. You guys remember the 5 process groups we talked about? Of course you do. Yeah, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and closing. Okay, good. So we're going to use all of those in this particular thing of integration. If you remember last time, we had a little matrix that had, 5 of the process groups and 10 of the program areas. Well, that's where we are. We're on that first row. That not 10 knowledge areas. This is the first one. Okay. So if you look at figure 4-1 on page 139, we'll kind of get this thing going. So this is their kind of a shortcut view of what this chapter is all about. So there's going to be an initiating group, and under that, one of the tasks you're going to have to do is develop the program charter. And this, of course, requires working with the stakeholders and things of that nature. So the output of this thing is you're going to end up with a project charter. And one of the interesting things that they don't really talk about all that well in the book, they kind of mention it, but they don't bring it to a head, is that one of the most significant features of the project charter is it approves the project. You could have a gazillion projects that you're working on, but only 5 of them have been approved that you're supposed to be working on. The rest are just hanging out there waiting for something else to happen. So the project charter is like your approval document. Okay, they say that, they just don't make it perfectly clear. And then the planning chunk. This is where you're going to be developing all of your project management plans. This is where all your documentation comes up. You're going to be producing your schedule and all the rest of the so-called deliverables. Directing and managing work, that kind of makes sense. So that particular process is all about, doing the things you're supposed to do. Do what the plan says. Whatever the plan says to do, that's what you're supposed to do. Monitoring and controlling has 2 sections in there. One for monitoring and controlling the project work. Okay, in other words, okay, I said it was going to be done by Tuesday. Has it been done by Tuesday? Simple stuff. But it also has performing the integration change control. And I kind of mentioned in a previous video that gathering requirements and gathering change requests is incredibly important, because somebody might say something off the cuff and then they expect it to be in the product and you weren't paying attention and you didn't write it down, because that happened to me. So monitoring and controlling the project, that's basically management and supervision, right? Crack that whip. But performing change management, that is all about gathering people's ideas and putting them in a system and recording who said what and who got assigned to what. And then, of course, last is closing out the project, which in our case isn't all that complicated, because all we're talking about is integration. Okay, so just to drive home the point, the book says that a lot of people consider this particular knowledge area of integration being one of the most significant keys to success of a project, is how well you talk. Not just how well you talk among yourselves, but how well you talk among the rest of the organization. In this particular case study, we're talking about the major stakeholders, the CEO of the company. So yes, this is highly likely. If you were bad at doing integration, your project may actually work, but you're going to end up having a disaster anyway, which is what happened in this particular case on the case study. So some people call this, instead of calling it integration, they call it interface management. How's that for a cool term? What that basically means is identifying those locations, those touch points, those places where you need to be talking to the managers or talking to the stakeholders. Identify those places where your project touches other places, and then managing those things and developing those relationships and all those kinds of things. So it takes an awful lot of good communication skills and developing relationships and managing relationships. Those are all touchy-feely things, right? Not things that a lead programmer may necessarily be good at, right? Okay, I know I'm being kind of like a stereotypical nerd, lead programmer kind of a thing, but it's true that a lot of people who are used to working with the trees, programmer is deep in the weeds trying to figure out why this one little piece doesn't work, and completely ignores the fact that there's a forest around them. Okay. I think we beat that point to death. So, going back to the case study. So, the problem was with the case study is he buried his head in the sand and did his thing, but didn't talk to anybody else. And unfortunately, it was extraordinarily important, because the product they were working on, some DNA sequencer, was key to a merger kind of a scenario, or a buyout scenario that the CEO was working with. So it was extraordinarily important that he get a lot of feedback during this thing, because he's either going to leverage that information to do a buyout or prevent a buyout, those kinds of things. It's extraordinarily important. It's probably the only thing that was on his mind. And to not hear anything from the project, essentially ever, just drove him nuts. Okay. So, on page 141, they talk about the strategic planning and project selection process. So, as you can probably imagine, the strategic plan is some long-term thing that says, we're going to take over, we're going to corner the market. I want 30% market share in, selling kumquats or building DNA machines, whatever it is. So your goal is this long-term thing. It's going to take several projects. It's not going to take one project to be able to pull that off. It's going to take several projects over a period of many years to be able to accomplish that strategic goal, right? Okay. So you have multiple projects, and you need to figure out which ones go first and which ones I can, you need some sort of a ranking system to make this thing work. Okay. So the first part of that process is the strategic plan. So what is your strategic plan? And if you got a fuzzy one, if your strategic plan is, we're going to sell, we're going to be the low-cost leader. Okay, that could be a good plan, but compared to what? And, if you're a car salesman, the goal is going to be, I want you to sell 100 cars this month. That's a perfectly good, tactical goal, short term. What do you want me to do this month? The strategic goal is going to be, we want to be the leading car sales in the area, right? So the short term, long term, cool. And by the way, what is long term? Kind of sort of depends. I mean, every industry has their own concept of what a strategic plan versus a tactical plan is, because like in the software business, it moves pretty quick. So I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, might be a strategic plan. But if you're in the mortgage business, well, then maybe it's 15 years is a strategic plan. So that time scale kind of changes. Okay. If you guys taken business courses, you probably remember the SWOT analysis. That's an acronym for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Typically, it's shown in a 4-quadrant kind of a thing. Usually it's just a box with 4 little corners. They've kind of done it a little differently here, but nevertheless. And the idea is, you look at what you're trying to do, and you figure out, we're pretty good at this. But, we suck at that. And so you actually write down the things that you're good at, the things that you're bad at, right? Make a list. And typically this is done like in a group of people get together and say, hey, let's do some SWOT analysis on regard to this project. And so in this particular case, using their example, they go, we don't have anybody here on our team that has any real accounting experience. So that got written down as a weakness. On the other hand, on the strengths, it's like, we've got strong interpersonal skills here and we got some good stuff. So write down all your strengths and weaknesses. Threats and opportunities. Opportunities are good things, right? Things that you could exploit to get better. Threats are the opposite. Those are things that could possibly go wrong. So you write all this stuff down, and then you say, okay, now how are we going to fix it, so to speak? So in their particular case, let's just look at the accounting one by example. What they basically said is, if you look at the scenario on page 142, after they're done with their SWOT analysis, here's what they came up with. They came up with, we need an external accountant. Okay, cool. We need to hire a web company because we don't really want to do that ourselves. We don't want to do our own website. Developing a marketing plan because they didn't have one. Cool. Have some sort of a project, make a good project proposal. Now, the project proposal, we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. A good project proposal ought to be like an elevator talk, if you heard that term. If you can pitch your idea in, a minute or 2 minutes, or however long it takes for an elevator to go up an elevator shaft, you catch the CEO in the elevator and you've got 60 seconds to pitch this idea. So it's got to be impactful, it's got to be on target, because it's really, really short period of time. Anyway, come up with a decent proposal. And then the last one is have some sort of a promotion plan. Put together a conference where you can talk about how you're going to promote this thing. So the idea here is the SWOT analysis help you come up with some remedies necessarily, or some ideas of where you can do better. All right. And identifying your weaknesses is actually a good thing. No one here knows anything at all about X. Okay, that's not necessarily a weakness. It's just something you need to say, okay, we need to hire somebody who knows X. Okay, it's no big deal. Okay, so all this is trying to help you prioritize a project. The whole point of the SWOT analysis in this particular case is to say, here's how we would proceed if we were to pick this project. So the next on page 143 is identifying all the potential projects. The idea is that you can't do them all. Okay, there's just not enough time in the world to do every single good idea that's out there. You're going to have to go through and kind of rate and rank them and sort them by, some criteria. There's lots of different ways you can do the ranking, and we'll talk about that. So they talk about the 4 stages of the selection process on page 144. So they're basically saying, here's the way that they set up in order to go through and look at different projects to figure out which ones are going to go or not. This is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark, and we'll pick this thing up again in just a few.